He had the looks, the fame, and the love of millions. Yet the one thing Cliff Richard never found was a wife. For decades, fans have wondered why. Why the man who sang so beautifully about love never shared his life with anyone. Why the man who brought joy to so many seemed destined to walk alone. Now at 85, Cliff Richard has finally opened up. About the pressures of fame that began when he was barely out of school. About the promises he made to God and to himself. And about the quiet truth he's carried for more than half a century. Because behind the songs, behind the charm and the faith, was a man torn between two worlds, the stage and the life he never lived. And as the years went on, that choice would define everything. In the late 1950s, Britain was still recovering from war, searching for color after years of gray. Out of that quiet emerged a teenager named Harry Webb, who would soon become Cliff Richard. He was barely 18 when the world decided he was their new idol. Overnight, he went from a shy boy in Hertfordshire to a voice that symbolized hope, youth, and rebellion. He didn't ease into fame. It hit like a storm. Screaming fans packed theaters, radio stations played his songs every hour, and reporters followed him from church halls to concert arenas. Within a year, he wasn't just a singer. He was the face of British pop. Yet behind the spotlight, he still lived at home with his parents, still asked permission before leaving the table. The world saw confidence. Inside, he felt overwhelmed by expectations he hadn't even learned to understand. Producers wanted an image that could rival Elvis Presley, clean yet daring, charming yet safe. Cliff obeyed, rarely arguing, learning early that control meant survival. He studied his interviews, polished his speech, avoided scandal. Every decision became measured, deliberate. While others chased attention, Cliff guarded his privacy like armor. It wasn't shyness, it was preservation. Fame had arrived too soon, and he sensed that every piece of himself he gave away would never return. Those who knew him then recall a man who seemed older than his years, constantly working, rarely resting. He rehearsed until dawn, toured without pause, and smiled even when exhaustion blurred the edges of his joy. When he watched fellow artists stumble under the weight of sudden success, he made a vow: never lose control. Never let emotion dictate his path. It was a promise born from fear, but also from faith. That discipline became his foundation. He believed talent was a gift that required stewardship, not indulgence. So while others found freedom in fame, Cliff found order. The applause was intoxicating, yet it reminded him of something missing: stillness, connection, normality. In the chaos of stardom, he began to build walls, not out of arrogance but out of self-protection. The boy who once dreamed of love songs now used them to keep love at a distance. As his records topped charts and his films filled theaters, one truth settled quietly in the background. He was learning how to live without needing anyone. Success had given him everything the world could see, except the space to belong to another person. And in the years that followed, that same self-control that saved him from the dangers of fame would become the reason he remained alone. As Cliff's fame grew, the public became fascinated by one thing above all: his private life. Fans wrote letters begging to know if he was in love, if there was someone behind the songs that filled their radios. The press watched every glance, every handshake, searching for the woman who might finally capture his heart. But behind closed doors, Cliff Richard was navigating something far more complex than the headlines suggested. He had experienced affection, even tenderness, but always from a distance. His first serious relationship came during the height of his early career, with Delia Wicks, a dancer who adored him long before he became a star. She saw the man, not the image. For a brief moment, they imagined a future together. A home, a family, a quieter life beyond the stage lights. Yet Cliff was already living inside a machine that never stopped moving. Tours, films, press calls, fan events, every minute was consumed. He told himself there would be time later, but later never came. Years after they parted, Delia's letter to him revealed the truth of what that distance cost. She wrote that she would always love him, but couldn't wait for a man who loved his work more than he could love her. It was a goodbye written with grace, but also heartbreak. When Cliff read it, he kept it, unable to throw it away. It became a quiet reminder of what discipline demanded, and what it denied. Around him, other opportunities for love appeared and disappeared just as quickly. He was charming, kind, and thoughtful, yet always reserved. Friends said he had a way of making women feel seen but never fully invited in. Even when he grew close to people who seemed right for him, something in him resisted. It wasn't pride, it was fear, not of rejection, but of being distracted from what he believed was his purpose. By his late 20s, Cliff had already begun speaking openly about faith. He saw it as a gift that came with responsibility. Marriage, to him, wasn't simply companionship. It was a promise he refused to make lightly. He once said he couldn't imagine giving a wife the life she deserved while living out of suitcases and performing hundreds of nights a year. It wasn't that he didn't want to love, it was that he couldn't divide himself. Those who knew him best say that from this period onward, something shifted. The romantic part of him, the young man who had once dreamed of settling down, slowly gave way to the realist, the performer, the believer. The stage became his constant partner, the music replaced intimacy, and the idea of love became something he sang about rather than lived. Still, as the years passed, one friendship would test that resolve more than any other, a connection so deep and enduring that it blurred the line between affection and devotion. And though he never crossed it, the world would spend decades wondering if he ever wished he had. In the early 1970s, when Cliff Richard was already a household name, he met someone who seemed to understand the world he lived in without needing it explained. She was kind, grounded, and carried the same quiet strength beneath the glare of fame. Their paths crossed through music, charity events, and television specials, and what began as professional admiration soon became a friendship that lasted a lifetime. They shared something rare in an industry built on appearances: sincerity. Both valued privacy. Both guarded their reputations carefully. And both believed that faith wasn't something to perform but to live by. When they spoke, it wasn't about fame or success. It was about meaning. About how to stay good when the world rewards spectacle. About how to stay kind when so many around them forgot how. Their chemistry on stage was undeniable. Viewers saw the ease in their laughter, the comfort in their glances, and assumed it must be love. But Cliff always drew a line between closeness and commitment. He once admitted that companionship could be beautiful without being romantic, and that love, in its purest form, didn't have to end in marriage. Those words described what they shared: something deep, steady, and untarnished by expectation. Over the years, that friendship became his emotional anchor. When he faced scrutiny, she was a voice of calm. When tabloids speculated about his choices, she offered understanding instead of judgment. In return, he admired her strength, her resilience, and her grace through personal battles of her own. They saw each other clearly, not as icons but as people trying to live decent lives in a world that rarely allowed it. As decades passed, their bond outlasted rumors, distance, and time. When her health declined later in life, Cliff remained devoted in the only way he knew how: quietly, faithfully, without fanfare. In interviews, when he spoke of friends who embodied compassion and faith, her name was always among them. Yet what made their connection remarkable wasn't what could have been. It was what it never needed to be. For Cliff, that friendship reinforced everything he had built his life around. Love didn't have to be claimed to be real. Affection didn't have to lead to possession. They showed that deep care could exist without crossing lines, and that restraint, though painful, could still be honorable. It was the kind of love that didn't ask for more, and that was precisely why it endured. And when she was gone, Cliff's words carried a weight that revealed what he had lost, not a lover but a mirror, someone who reflected the best parts of who he tried to be. It left him with a truth he'd spent a lifetime avoiding, that even the purest friendships can leave an ache that feels like love. For Cliff Richard, faith was never a public performance. It was a quiet discipline that shaped every choice he made, including the decision to live without marriage. When his fame reached its peak in the late 1960s, he began to feel an emptiness that applause couldn't fill. He had achieved everything a performer could want: sold-out tours, chart-topping hits, international recognition. Yet beneath the noise there was restlessness. He felt called to something beyond fame. In 1966, he took a step that changed his life. He was baptized, dedicating himself to Christianity with a sincerity that surprised many in the music industry. For Cliff, this wasn't a phase. It was a lifelong commitment. He read scripture daily, sought guidance through prayer, and began viewing his career not as a pursuit of wealth or glory, but as a way to serve. That shift of purpose brought clarity, but it also demanded sacrifice. He believed that marriage was sacred and should never be entered into lightly. It wasn't that he looked down on love or intimacy. He simply feared making promises he couldn't honor completely. Touring the world for months, living in hotels, constantly surrounded by staff and fans, it was a life without stillness. He knew a marriage built on half-presence would eventually collapse. So he made a vow of discipline, not forced celibacy, but chosen restraint. A life devoted to service, music, and faith. His belief in purity often drew criticism and misunderstanding. Some saw his choices as avoidance, others as isolation. But Cliff viewed them as obedience, a way of aligning his life with his beliefs. When asked why he had never married, he once said, "It just never felt right. Maybe it was never meant for me." There was no bitterness in that admission, only acceptance. He saw his singleness not as loss, but as freedom to live without conflict between his heart and his calling. Still, the balance between faith and feeling was not without pain. There were moments when loneliness crept in, moments when he saw friends settle into family life and wondered if he had misunderstood his own destiny. But those doubts never lasted long. He would return to prayer, to his guitar, to the songs that had carried him through every season of his life. The stage became his ministry, his music his offering. By the 1980s, Cliff had become one of the few public figures in entertainment to live with such conviction, refusing to conform to the industry's temptations. He spoke openly about moral boundaries, not to preach, but to defend the values that kept him whole. It earned him both admiration and ridicule. Yet through it all, he never compromised. Faith had cost him companionship, but it had given him peace. And though the world would continue to speculate about his private life, Cliff seemed untouched by it, because his story was never about what he lacked, it was about what he chose. And that choice, to live for purpose instead of passion, would become both his strength and his solitude. As the years went on, the silence surrounding Cliff Richard's private life became a story of its own. What had begun as personal discipline turned into public curiosity. The tabloids, starved for answers, filled the gaps with speculation. Every photograph with a woman became a headline. Every friendship was dissected, questioned, and misread. And the more he refused to explain, the louder the whispers grew. By the 1970s, Cliff was one of the most recognized faces in Britain. He could no longer walk down a street or attend church without being followed. Reporters watched him at airports, waiting to capture any gesture that could be turned into gossip. When nothing surfaced, they invented what they couldn't prove. His kindness toward friends became secret romances. His quiet loyalty to faith became eccentric restraint. The image of a man who had avoided scandal was recast as someone hiding something. But Cliff never fought back with anger. He understood the nature of fame, that mystery invites projection. Instead of chasing rumors, he chose dignity. When interviewers pressed him about his relationships, he smiled, deflecting the question with humor or grace. He once said, "If people can't understand that a man can be happy without marriage, that's their problem, not mine." It wasn't defensiveness, it was self-protection. He refused to let curiosity cheapen the life he had built. Still, the pressure was constant. The entertainment world thrived on confession, on drama, on spectacle. Cliff gave them none of it. While others courted attention through controversy, he continued recording, touring, and performing with the same sincerity that had defined him from the beginning. He believed that the best way to quiet rumor was not to react, but to outlast it. His composure came at a cost. The more he stayed silent, the more isolated he became. Some of his closest friends urged him to clarify, to tell his side, to make the headlines stop. But Cliff believed that truth didn't need defending. He had seen what fame could do to those who tried to control their image. The exhaustion, the bitterness, the loss of peace. He wouldn't let that happen to him. And when false stories occasionally resurfaced, often years later, he met them with the same calm patience. To him, the test of faith wasn't found on a stage or in a song. It was in how one endured misunderstanding without losing compassion. Through every decade, he remained the same, steady, gracious, unshaken. In a world obsessed with exposure, he chose silence. And that silence, though it protected him, also created a loneliness that fame could never erase. Because when you live your life without defending it, you also live it without being fully seen. Through all the speculation, Cliff Richard quietly built a life defined not by romance but by loyalty. He never lived in isolation. He surrounded himself with people he trusted, friends who understood his values and respected his privacy. While the world waited for a wife that never came, Cliff created a different kind of family, one rooted in faith, shared purpose and enduring companionship. He found comfort in community rather than intimacy. His home became a gathering place for those who needed guidance, laughter, or simply peace from the outside world. Those close to him describe warmth, generosity, and humor that never appeared in tabloids. Behind closed doors, he wasn't the distant celebrity people imagined. He cooked, prayed, and talked late into the night with friends who had become his chosen family. Among those who stood beside him the longest was Bill Latham, his manager and confidant for more than 30 years. Their bond was built on trust, faith, and shared mission. Together, they traveled, organized tours, and navigated the pressures that came with fame. Their friendship weathered decades of speculation, yet Cliff never explained it to the public. He believed that not every bond required permission from strangers to exist. What mattered was sincerity, not perception. His friendships with fellow musicians and colleagues were just as deep. Many described him as a man of quiet gratitude, someone who remembered birthdays, sent handwritten letters, and never forgot the kindness shown to him early in his career. He nurtured relationships not through romance but through consistency. And for those who worked closest with him, that loyalty meant more than any public declaration. Through faith communities, he found belonging. Through mentorship, he found purpose. Through friendship, he found connection. These relationships became the framework of his later life. When the spotlight dimmed, he wasn't alone. He had built a circle that reflected what marriage might have offered: stability, understanding, unconditional care, only without the vows or expectations. He often spoke about companionship as a divine gift, not limited to marriage. Love, he once reflected, comes in many forms, and they are all worth having. For Cliff, this was not a justification but a truth lived every day. He saw beauty in friendship, holiness in loyalty, and fulfillment in service. While others measured life by who they married, he measured his by who he stood beside. As he grew older, this chosen circle became his anchor. When grief arrived, when beloved friends passed or moved away, the losses hit deeply. Yet even in sorrow he never wavered in his belief that his life had been complete in its own way. Fame had made him visible. Friendship made him whole. Still, beneath the contentment, there was a quiet ache, the awareness that companionship can steady the heart, but it cannot fill the silence left by the life never lived. And as the years turned to decades, that silence became part of him, not a wound but a shadow he learned to walk beside. At 85, Cliff Richard stands as one of the last living figures from the golden age of pop, who has carried both faith and fame across 6 decades without losing himself. He has nothing left to prove, no image left to protect, and no interest in rewriting his story. For the first time he speaks with quiet acceptance about the choice that once puzzled the world, why he never married. His words are gentle, without regret. He says he simply followed what felt right for him, and that happiness was never something he measured by the same standards as others. To him, marriage was not the only way to love or to live fully. He believes that his path, though unconventional, was guided. Every success, every heartbreak, every friendship, he sees as part of a plan that shaped his faith and tested his endurance. He still remembers moments of longing, the thought of what might have been if he had chosen differently, watching friends celebrate anniversaries, raise children, grow old hand in hand. Yet he also knows what that life might have cost him, the focus that sustained his calling, the energy that carried his music into the lives of millions. It was a trade he accepted long ago, not with bitterness, but with understanding. When he looks back now, he doesn't see what he missed. He sees what endured. 6 decades of songs that lifted spirits, countless acts of charity that changed lives, a legacy that reflects stability rather than scandal, and friendships that lasted far longer than most marriages do. He often says he feels blessed beyond measure, not because of what he gained, but because of what he was spared: heartbreak, betrayal, and the distractions that might have led him away from purpose. As time has softened his features and slowed his steps, it hasn't dimmed his gratitude. He still records, still performs, still greets every audience as if it might be his last. When he speaks about the future, it's with calm certainty that his story is complete as it is. He doesn't question the path he took. He thanks God for it. He admits that loneliness visits him sometimes in the quiet after a show, in the empty hours of the night, but he no longer sees it as punishment. It's part of the balance he chose, the cost of a life lived with conviction. And if that conviction left him alone, it also left him free. When asked what he would tell his younger self, he pauses before answering. "You did what you were meant to do," he says softly. And that's enough. It's a statement not of pride, but of peace. The peace of a man who found love in faith, purpose in solitude, and fulfillment in staying true to himself. Cliff Richard's story is not one of loneliness but of clarity. He chose a path few could understand, and even fewer could follow. In an age where fame devoured those who chased it, he learned how to hold it without being consumed. The same discipline that kept him from scandal also kept him from surrendering his heart. Yet in that restraint lies the quiet strength that defines him. He has lived through every season, from teenage idol to knighted legend, without letting bitterness take root. He has seen his peers fall to excess, watched friends drift away, and faced waves of speculation that would have broken lesser men. Still he endures, steady and unshaken, because he never let the world decide what would fulfill him. He turned away from the idea that love must take one form. Instead, he lived a life of service, loyalty, and conviction. He gave his heart to music, his faith to God, and his time to the people who needed him most. Every song, every smile, every act of kindness became his version of love, shared, multiplied, and never withheld. At 85, he remains a symbol of grace in an industry that rarely rewards it. His life proves that faith can be louder than fame, and that peace can outlast passion. Cliff Richard never married, But he never lacked love. It surrounded him in the form of fans, friends, and faith that carried him farther than any romance could. And when his story is told, it won't be about what he avoided, but what he achieved. A man who stayed true when the world changed around him. A man who sang about love and in his own way lived it completely. For more emotional stories, check out this video.